Welcome to the PR Hotline podcast, your first call for PR fixes. This is the podcast where we tackle the problems that keep PRs and marketing professionals up at night, from client chaos to career issues, and break down some of the industry's best campaigns along the way. Each week, we're joined by a different guest who brings their own honest take on the highs, lows, and lessons of working in PR and marketing. Today, we're talking all about how to manage multiple clients across different sectors without losing your sanity or your strategy. Our guest this week is Charlotte McManus, Digital PR Strategist at Digitaloft, who shares some really honest advice about how to stay organised, set boundaries, and keep your creativity flowing when you're juggling everything from fashion to finance in a single day. We get into how to balance the fun clients with the more complex ones, how to avoid defaulting to the same safe ideas, and why switching sectors can actually make you a stronger strategist. Charlotte also shares how her team works behind the scenes to avoid burnout, manage priorities, and keep client expectations realistic, even when things get busy. And of course, she brings along a brilliant campaign for us to dissect. Let's get into it.
So I am a digital PR strategist at Digitaloft, which is an agency that works in SEO and PR, as well as kind of content creation. I've worked in the PR industry for coming up 3 years now. I left university having done my English and media degree and went straight into agency side, working in a small media agency in Liverpool and then joining Digitaloft as a digital PR executive and then working up to a strategist and working as an account manager now. I've been here for about 2.5 years and I've worked across loads of different industries. So your fashion, your retail, your travel, your health. If there's an industry there, I've probably touched on it a little bit in agency life.
Amazing. So you've got lots of experience to talk us through our problem for today. So problem for today, we've had a person that we've chatted to on the newsletter before that has basically submitted some problems or issues that they've had, and we're going to discuss it today of what your experience is and any advice that you would give. So they have said that working agency side means juggling lots of different clients across different sectors, often at once. I find it hard to fully immerse myself in certain brands because others naturally demand more attention or urgency. It makes me wonder, is it even possible to give every client the same level of care and strategic thinking when you stretch across multiple industries? And how can we manage switching between sectors without dropping the ball? So as a digital PR strategist, Digitaloft, like you've just said, you've just literally said that you worked across multiple industries from like fashion and everything like that. How do you, on a kind of daily basis, prepare yourself to jump between those different sectors? Is there specific things that you do within a day to get ready, structure, anything like that you do?
So I'm going to say compartmentalization and time management is probably your best friend. I am such a big fan of a physical to-do list. I've got one right here with all my tasks for the day. I think just remembering that, yes, you've got different sectors, you've got different clients, but remembering that they are separate and they are separate tasks, so you don't need to work on them all at once. I think when I first started as an agency worker, I worked predominantly on outreach, so you basically got your tasks, you ticked one off each time, and until that other task was done, you didn't think about your next one. Obviously, as I've moved on to a strategist and I've become an account manager on different accounts, it is harder to kind of strike that balance between working on one client at a time and also having your always on radar on. I think if you learn all of your sectors well enough, you can be a bit more seamless in switching through accounts in different sectors. So it's almost less of a challenge and less of a struggle to go from travel to, to retail to house bills. But I think that prioritising your task one by one and not letting it overwhelm you in that sense is probably the best thing to do. What I normally do each morning is look at all my clients, look at where they are in their quarters, what needs doing for them as a whole, and then take about half an hour to prioritise what needs doing when. If you've got a client whose quarter is finishing next week and they've got a campaign that needs launching this week, that's probably going to take up more of your time. And it is okay to kind of work on one client a little bit more on one day than it is to then focus on another day. It's not 50-50 all the time. So letting yourself off a little bit.
Would you say that being a strategist is harder to switch between clients compared to exec doing outreach work?
Do you know what? It's such a politician's answer to this, but It's give and take. I'd say when you're a strategist, because you're working with the clients day to day, you're kind of more immersed in them. And because you know more about them, you kind of don't have to turn that switch on as much. So you don't have to teach yourself all about boilers every time you go onto a client and kind of remind yourself what them words mean, because as you work with them so much, it almost becomes second nature. An exec, it's kind of easy to see them a bit more separately. As a strategist, I'd say it's probably easier to be a bit more always on, just because you're so immersed in all your different strategies. Yeah, bit of a give and take answer.
You have touched on this slightly, but you've just mentioned like the familiarity of your clients and as you get used to them a little bit more. But are there any industries that you do find easier to switch into than others?
Yeah, so I think we all know that there are them industries that you look at when you first get them and you think, I do not know that much about that. And I think working in PR, you kind of become an expert at very random things that you weren't into at the beginning. Some clients, yeah, I think it is easier to switch into. If you're someone who likes traveling, for example, and you have a travel client, you probably do enjoy ideating and thinking about that work a bit easier. Whereas if you're working, say, B2B on a company that you haven't necessarily learnt before, you are going to have to spend that little bit of extra time immersing yourself in it and getting used to what certain words mean. I think that's where your timing comes into it. You know, if I know I need to ideate for a B2B client, I'd be doing myself a disservice by scheduling an ideation for that Friday afternoon post 3 p.m. slump. Whereas maybe a travel client, once your brain starts getting ready for the weekend, you are thinking more kind of loosely and ready to ideate things like that. I think it's kind of knowing where your, I don't want to say weaknesses are, but knowing when you have a client, if you do know that you don't know that much stuff about it, taking time to research, then hopefully it becomes almost an even playing field. I'm sure you guys have had it before where you've worked on clients and you suddenly know so much stuff about a really random topic that you're almost passionate about it. You know, passionate about gravel, for example, because you've learned so much about it. But yeah, I'd say at the start it can be hard, but once you've kind of immersed yourself into that client's culture,
it kind of comes back to what you've just said about like knowing your own strengths almost and your own knowledge of clients, and you can kind of then time management that way.
Yeah, 100%. I think we do it quite a lot as well at Digitaloft, where if we know that someone's really passionate about something, it's so easy to go to them and be like, can we just have a 10-minute chat? And can you teach me what you know as a consumer of this? And kind of that helps you to kind of learn a bit more about who you want to be targeting almost. But yeah, knowing what you need to kind of brush up on a little bit. And you know that within yourself when you see a client that you're a bit like scared of.
What would you say there's an exec that's just come on board and they've been faced with like 3 different clients that they've been given, they don't know anything about it. What would be the first step that you would take or suggest to them to take to get immersed in themselves a bit more? Because obviously when you get out of uni, you kind of like, you don't really have passions or anything like that. It's once you start getting a bit more into the agency life, PR life, that you start to figure out where you want to kind of go with things.
So I think if you're an exec that isn't familiar with a certain subject or maybe multiple subjects, like you said, say you've joined an agency, you're in a certain group and they've said we work on A, B and C and you think, I don't know about these. First of all, admit it to the people that you work with. I've never worked on this type of client. They know what you've worked on in the past. If you're straight out of uni, they're very aware of that. And then just take a few hours to go through your client's website, see what they offer. Go on the About Them page, I always find is really useful. It kind of helps name their ethics, where they come from, if they're an e-commerce brand, what they sell, and then go on to kind of their competitors' websites, what they do, what type of blogs they've been writing, what they are doing well, what they're not doing well, and then also just type in the sector on the news. I've had it before where we've had kind of an energy client in a certain industry and I've not known much about it, so I'll put on Google alerts, and then whenever something happens in that space, that news, I can kind of be aware of what's going on where you don't naturally look to that.
I wonder if ChatGPT is a good way to go for it now, because I never had things like that.
Yeah.
Even in PR, but I guess you could literally just
explain this to me.
ChatGPT, but like, yeah, give it to me in the most simple terms. I've just
100%. I've definitely worked with people in the past that have had like something like, say, I don't know, a new government scheme's happened in, and they've written to ChatGPT and been like, please can you explain this to me in the most simple, like as if you're explaining it to a child.
Yeah.
And it's helped, like it works, doesn't it? And then I suppose once you've got that grasp, you can then research yourself, and then, you're not expected to be a genius and know everything
Exactly.
in the world.
I do think it takes time as well to get acquainted with things. In terms of the actual clients and the actual client work and things like that. So what do you do if a client is more needy than another one? So you obviously don't want to give one client the most attention, then kind of like isolate the other one. But obviously some clients do need that extra support and extra like messages and emails and everything like that. So how do you make that decision, and how do you communicate that maybe with the clients as well?
Yeah, I think, like you said, it's so hard to kind of not be a people pleaser in that sense as well. I think time tracking is probably really important in terms of how much time you are spending, like you said, replying to them emails. If you've noticed that you're spending 2 hours a day replying to one client and it's kind of impacting, first of all, your other clients, but also what you're doing for that client, it's something to definitely take a note of and look to yourself and think, all right, is there a way that I can then email that client and say, how about we do a daily roundup and say, let's talk about X, Y, and Z at the end of every day. I think obviously we've all had them clients that don't email ever. Like they're very much just like, yeah, that's fine, that's great. And it
The
can kind of
ideal
a dream client, if you ask me. It can be easy to kind of fall into the, oh, well, they're not going to ask me about it, so why ask about it? But I think that's where you look at kind of your results, your time spent versus what they're paying you, like if someone's paying you for a certain amount of hours and you're going over, that's something that you kind of need to discuss internally with your team. Especially agency side, it's really important to monitor your results in terms of how much you're getting paid.
Yeah.
At Digitaloft, we basically have a big kind of sheet that goes through how many hours we spent, whether we're over budget, how far away we are from the KPI, and how far along they are each quarter to prioritize, to know what we need to prioritize. So each morning we'll take factors such as if a campaign's just launched, whether a client's quarter is coming to an end, if there's been any falls in kind of SEO work, and then look at how we should prioritize the work that we're doing. Obviously, each account manager will be the one replying to the clients, but how can we delegate the outreach to the execs, for example? Can we say, all right, well, we know that it's a key sales period for this certain client, they love Easter sales, they work in the Christmas brand, so we need to work throughout December for them, and kind of just look at, just because one client is emailing you and asking for more doesn't mean that the other clients don't deserve that.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
That's a very analytical and strategic way, I guess, of looking at things as well. So I think that's
We love a formula, I think.
Who doesn't?
As well, it takes out the kind of emotions of it. Obviously, you do become quite
definitely.
emotionally intertwined, but having them morning calls as well to kind of talk amongst other account managers and be like, no, like you can't just be focusing on one client, kind of puts you in check a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. It's like accountability within your team. Leading on from that a little bit, do you think that the current pace of agency life, especially in digital PR, how we can be super busy all the time, do you think that it's getting harder to give each client the strategic thinking that they deserve?
I know I keep going on about time management, but that probably is why it's so important, especially in agency life. I also think it's probably a bit harder in smaller agencies, but it's so important to make sure that you trust the team that you're working with and that you can delegate if need be. So I work so closely with my line manager and also with the people below to look at capacity and make sure that, our clients' quarters don't overlap too much. If you can, I know you can't always, but try not to have it where all your clients' quarters end on the same month, because then you're doing about 7 reviews. It's a nightmare, essentially. But it basically means that you can spend like, okay, this month even this week, I'm going to take a few hours to deep dive into this client, and I'm going to ask my line manager or the person who also helps on the account to look out for any emails or to flag anything to me if needs be. I know we have account managers, but we also always make sure that there is another person who's CC'd into the emails or joins us on any calls, just so, first of all, if we're off sick, they still have people to talk to. And second of all, if you do need help, you can just be like, all right, life's very busy at the moment. Can you just reply to this email for me? I think as well, making sure that you, again, don't have that overlap time, but also making sure that you trust your execs to outreach means that as a strategist, you can really deep dive into clients. There's some days that I don't outreach at all. I literally I'll say, right, I'm blocking out these 3 hours and I'm going to really look into this campaign strategy and see why it's not working. And I'll rely on my execs to read the strategies that I'm writing and outreach to them journalists and write the emails that need writing. Obviously, I can look over it. I do look over it before it goes out, but kind of not relying on other people, but making sure that you trust the team. Yeah, I think, teamwork makes the dream work. I do think as well that having other people who you can kind of say, all right, I need someone who's stepped out of the picture a little bit. Can you go in and look at this strategy as well? So we have a PR manager who basically doesn't have any accounts to herself, but helps other people when they kind of need help. So
That's a very good role. I don't think I've ever been at an agency that's had a role like that.
Obviously, she does many other things, but if I'm
not saying that she
I would love it if that was just my job. But say I've been in a strategy for 4 hours and I'm thinking, what is going on? Like, why can't this work? But I've been in it since ideation, and I'm a little bit in love with this idea.
You can definitely get campaign fatigue, I think.
100%. Or when you're so involved in that campaign and you're like, well, why wouldn't a journalist understand it? And of course you understand it because you've been there since conception.
Yeah.
It's really good to have someone to just go, all right, I'm going to take a look in it. I've got a fresh pair of eyes. I'm going to take that deep dive.
So would you say that definitely having somebody that hasn't got the knowledge of your client but is still there available to kind of jump in if you get that kind of like block? I would say it's like a writer's block for digital PR when you just can't
100%. And I think, like obviously knowing about the client, understanding the client, but not being so deeply intertwined in it that you kind of do give yourself a block a little bit. So having that fresh pair of eyes really helps. I think in an agency, you never really run out of fresh pairs of eyes either, even if it's just, you turn next to someone in the office or in the virtual office and say, can you just look over this and see what you think?
Yeah.
I think that really helps. I don't know whether obviously in-house gets that as much, but definitely it helps.
I've never worked in-house, so I can't actually provide that experience, but I can say that it would be lovely as a freelancer to have somebody to look at a campaign for me.
No,
I don't unfortunately get that. Right, I will quickly move on. So we're kind of talking about now, obviously like having people to help. What do you do? And you were just kind of talking about it there in terms of like if something's not going well and you've got to redo strategies and things like that. But what is your opinion on if you're working across clients and specifically in agency life and something does really well at another on another client, like a headline absolutely flies, and you've got a client where it would work really well on the other, if that makes sense? How do you keep the ideas fresh, or like how do you stop it from it's like just copying across the clients? How do you keep it fresh and exciting and interesting?
I know what you mean. It's so easy to be like, oh well, this worked last year, so why don't we just refresh that? Or this worked for that client, why don't we do it? I think first of all you probably have to catch yourself a little bit and be like, let's not do that. Let's take extra time and try and go out with really out of the box ideas that can then be pulled back in a little bit. So when we ideate, kind of the first section of the session even is always like, think anything. Think if you had whatever budget, what could you do? And then we can pull it back if need be, instead of kind of accidentally falling into them, like you said, campaigns that we do probably see quite a lot. The more like, oh, well, we've asked this and this is what the answer is, which great and it works. But like you said, I know what you mean. I think it's important to keep up with what is going on in the PR world when it comes to ideating. This is something that we discussed internally the other week about, before you have them ideation sessions, look at the really big campaigns that are working and see if you get inspired. Instead of just looking internally into what we've recently done, look at the PR Insider.
Yeah.
Look at LinkedIn, look and see what other people are talking about, or even if your mum's mentioned something you think, yeah, that's definitely a PR campaign, use that type of stuff. As well, whenever I have a spare idea, I know loads of people do this, even when you're not ideating, even if you don't work on a client that is to do with that at that point in time, write it down. So then when it does come to ideating, you can look at it. Because chances are when you're out on a walk and you're not confined to that ideation session, you're not falling back to them kind of safe ideas.
Yeah.
Because you're not thinking, I've got to think with 4 ideas.
I was generally going to invent something that you could take in the shower with you and write, because I swear some of my best ideas come to me.
Shower
in the
ideas.
shower.
It's always in the shower or on a walk.
Yeah.
I've had it before where like I've woke up at like 3 a.m. and wrote in my notes, and the next day I've woke up like
That's
I've
how you
woke up.
know you're dedicated.
Yeah, and then you look and it's the world's like rubbishest idea, but you think, all right, there was clearly something going on there. Like I can work on it if I need to. I also think as well, though, building that relationship with your client to be able to say, I've got this idea, or we've got this idea. Do you want to try it? I know, obviously, not everyone can do that. If they only do 1 campaign a quarter, you're not wanting to do a massive risk. But if you're with a client who you've worked with for a while, and they've discussed, oh, I've seen this, I want to do big, bold ideas, try and talk to them about it, see if they have any ideas, because they don't have the same almost constraints of knowing what works in PR. I think sometimes we think, well, I know this works and I know this works, so why don't I just do that? Whereas if you talk to someone who's never known them restraints, they're thinking them big and bold ideas. So I think just be bold with your ideas, and then if you need to get pulled back down to earth, you can do, and you do, and that's what validation's for. But the ideating bit's supposed to be fun.
Moving in a slightly different direction, Charlotte, have you found that working across such vast industries has actually strengthened your strategy skills?
100%. So the first ever client I worked on in my first ever agency, it was a very PR friendly client. So kind of whatever you sent out secured coverage. It was just one of them dream clients that everyone hopes they get. It wasn't until I started working on those kind of tougher clients that I had to teach myself how to immerse myself in something that I didn't really know about, or I had to learn how to talk to journalists that were a bit more niche, or a bit more kind of stiff upper lipped, if that makes sense. So I think it's really, really nice working on clients where you absolutely love the industry, you talk about it, it's kind of the stuff you read about. But agency work kind of forces you to work on clients that you wouldn't necessarily put yourself in front of. And I think that working on them type of clients teaches you how to become an expert on things that you aren't necessarily an expert at, and helps you to rely on the strategy of what you're writing and how you're writing it, as opposed to what is being written about. If it's something that's a bit harder to write about, you really have to focus on, okay, how am I going to outreach this? Who am I going to outreach it to?
Yeah.
And what's the difference? I think that it really does help you shape into a multi-hatted PR.
I have had a similar experience in terms of my first client when I started at Rise at 7 was Misguided, which is literally like your dream client coming out of uni. Like, I'm working with Misguided. And then most recently working with a water filtration client. It's just
exactly. And you think my first one, you could have outreach, there's a sale on, or get Kylie Jenner's look, and then suddenly you're having to outreach to B2B.
Yeah.
What do water rates mean? And you almost do have to work that little bit harder to really look for a newsworthy story in something that people might not want to cover that much. But that sometimes it's more rewarding.
I think it, like you've just said, I think it makes you a better PR. I think it makes you more analytical about things. And I just think it makes you grow a lot quicker as a PR and within the industry when you've got clients that are making you work a bit harder.
Yeah.
For them. So I would very much agree.
It would also be really boring if you had all the same type of clients.
I often think that about, obviously in-house will be great, and one day maybe, it'll be all in-house, who knows. I do think though sometimes it is nice to kind of be like, okay, I've done this and now I get to work on this and now I get to work on this, and it does kind of.
Well, it happens a lot with people who go from agency to in-house, is that they go in-house and they're like, I've got nothing to do. Like, I write a press
and I suppose, do you then get the fatigue? Who knows? Do you know
there's ebbs and flows.
We're talking to people who haven't worked in-house.
Yeah. So for our next section of the podcast, we've asked Charlotte to bring along with her a campaign that she's seen that she's really loved, or she just wants to kind of talk about, to talk a bit more about it with us, and we basically analyse it a bit, really. So Charlotte, tell us what campaign you've brought in and talk us through it.
So I have brought in the Harley Street Skin Clinic calculator, which was created by Harley Street Skin Clinic, which is a leading brand in London that works with kind of aesthetics, facials, procedures and such. And this campaign basically tells you how much your job is aging you. So how stressful your job is, what factors could be aging you, and if you're in a job that's going to make you look 10 times older than people who work in other industries, which I think is very interesting.
I tried it before we jumped on this, and thankfully I am not prematurely aging myself in my job. Although I don't know how I'm not. Like I said,
Yeah, when I think of my back posture, I think that is aging me.
I originally actually saw this because I think it got some coverage on The Sun.
Yes,
Actually, how would you, if you were to critique it, what would you say is its strongest point, and what would you say would be anything that you would maybe, I'm not saying do better because I think it's an amazing campaign, but anything that you would maybe do differently if you were to push it out, or anything like that?
Yeah, so something that I love at the moment is a really relevant campaign, and I think that this is super relevant for the Harley Street Skin Clinic brand. So basically the campaign looks at what factors in your job can age you. So whether you're outside all the time, whether you work long hours, and whether you're kind of stressed in your job. And then at the bottom of the campaign, it links really well to product pages on the Harley Street Skin Clinic website. Them kind of, well, if your job does age you, get a facial, or here's some Botox, or, there's a salmon sperm facial if you want it. Obviously, they don't call it that. So what I really like about the campaign is that it's relevant to the brand that it's about. These people know a lot about what ages you. They worked with doctors in the campaign, so it's really got that authoritative kind of information source.
Yeah.
And I also love how much it appeals to a wide range of audience. So I think it would have been so easy, and it's probably been done in the past, it would have been so easy to just name the 10 most stressful jobs in the UK, or the 10 jobs that are aging you the most. And if you're working in one of them jobs that aren't the jobs that aren't put on the top 10, you're not going to be that bothered.
Yeah.
Whereas I think you're like, oh, well, I'm not represented. Like, you think my job isn't stressful. You think that my job isn't hard. Whereas with this being kind of an interactive, it is an interactive campaign where you can click different things. No matter what your job is, you can click on that, and it kind of reflects people. So even the journalists who are opening that pitch can be like, all right,
yeah,
how stressful is my job? And it kind of feeds into that curiousness.
Yeah, definitely.
I also think it feeds into that the British element of being a complainer, essentially. I've said it to my partner before about how stressful my job is and how tired it makes me, and then he'll be like, yeah, well, same. And I think it feeds on that. And I can just
do a competition who had the most stress.
Yeah, and it was him, but I don't want to say that. He's like working long hours, and I'm like, I've had to work from home today. It's been really hard. But yeah, I think that it really helped. People who aren't even interested in getting Botox will be interested in knowing how stressful or how much their job is aging them. I think it also kind of feeds into that insecurity, as awful as it sounds, of like we mentioned earlier, should I be hunching over on my desk? Like, should I be doing 100 steps a day because I work from home? It kind of feeds into that. Yeah, like, is what I'm doing day to day making me a bit unhealthier or age a bit quicker?
I think this, from my opinion anyway, I think for me, a good campaign is something that's shareable. It's something that you want to talk to other people about. I know the common theme of that is, would you tell your mum about it? Or would you share it with your mum?
Yeah.
It's got a really, really lovely landing page. I haven't seen a campaign that's got such a nice flow to
as well,
it.
Isn't it? Which is really
not got
nice.
too much going on.
Yeah.
It represents the brand, and it's also got a bit of data led behind it as well. So yeah, I think it's an amazing campaign from my point of view.
No, 100%. Yeah, and it's trusted data. These people are trusted. they're trusted to treat people's faces. So of course they're going to be trusted to talk about people's faces. They've been on TV before. They've been spoken about. You can read up about all the qualifications. Like, there's no reason not to trust what they're saying. So I think that's really important as well.
And I think in a industry at the moment that gets a lot of shit for not being relevant and things like that, having a campaign that's so relevant to the client and yeah, it's just a fab campaign, I think is absolutely perfect.
I've actually seen this all over LinkedIn, and I agree. I absolutely love it. I love the landing page interactive element, like you say. And I know, Charlotte, something you always talk about is sort of the pub test.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a new one.
So could you imagine being sat round a pub with your mates and being like, my job is like is the most stressful in the UK. Like, my job ages you more than your, and it just would cause a bit of a conversation. It is almost like, would you tell your mum if you brought it up on a pub table? Is someone going to be interested? If you go, oh, have you seen this thing that like tells you how much your job's aging you? There, people are going to be like, no, what is it?
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of like you said. It kind of, is it going to cause a conversation? Do people actually care about it? And I think if it does, journalists are going to care, and it is going to be a good campaign.
Yeah, I mean, you said about wanting to have that competition with
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
And this is definitely something I see like me and my friends looking at and using, like a little, it's like them magazine quizzes where you follow it down, but it's an interactive version.
I always bring up them magazine quizzes, like, oh, what Jonas brother would you end up with? And just stuff like that, when it's so easy to get an answer, even if you don't care that much, because it takes less than 2 minutes, you're like, oh, well, I might as well.
Yeah.
I think I know that the traffic to that page has spiked so much. And obviously with that internal linking as well, it's really helped build SEO authority as well. So they've just smashed it, I think, with that campaign. They've done really well.
Is there any parts of it that you would like suggest to improve? Obviously we've all agreed that it's a fab campaign, but most things always need a tiny little critique here and there. Is there anything like that you would suggest?
I wouldn't suggest anything for this campaign, but I think it'd be really interesting if they could do a follow-up. I don't know, obviously they would have had to do it at the beginning, but if there would have been a way to collect the data of the people who visited that campaign, obviously after asking their permission, but if they could type in, where do they come from, what's their job, and then they could do that data. It would have been so easy for them to kind of say, people in Hertfordshire have the most stressful, the most aging jobs. I think that would have been a really good use of internal data, but we don't know. Maybe they will do that. Obviously, we don't work with Harley Street Skin Clinic, but yeah, I think with the amount of people that are doing the test, it'd be really interesting if there would be a way that they could almost use the page as a data source. It'd be really
awesome. Okay, fab. So in terms of any key takeaways that you would suggest from this campaign, any learnings or anything like that you would give to PRs? We've talked a lot about like different things that make a campaign good there. Is there anything that you would take away or give to other people as takeaways from this?
Yeah, so I think the main thing, and I know we've mentioned about it, is, does it make sense that your client's talking about it? Will people trust that your client knows what they're talking about? Here they know that doctors know what they're on about. It makes sense for people to look to Harley Street Skin Clinic, and it makes sense for it to be on that website when the website offers rejuvenating skin procedures. I do think it's so important to have an authoritative and trustworthy site, and I think that's why Harley Street Skin Clinic's done so well. And then again, like we said, can you imagine talking about it? Or even if it is something that you wouldn't necessarily talk about, like we said earlier, water waste, could you imagine people who are interested in that talking about it? And do you think it's got enough of a pull? And I think if you think it's authoritative, it makes sense, and it's interesting, you probably do have yourself a good campaign. They would probably be my 3 little ticks when ideating.
Little checklist there.
So thank you so much for joining us on this episode, Charlotte, and sharing your expert tips and tricks on how to smoothly switch between clients. I know this is something that a lot of PR struggle with, so I think this will be really helpful. And yeah, thank you to everyone else for listening. We really hope you enjoyed this week's episode, and we hope you join us on the next one.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Thank you so much.